Hey guys, and welcome to today's episode of Give It the Beans. It is my absolute pleasure to reintroduce a former guest that we have been trying to arrange this podcast recording for a while, and I'm so happy that I've finally got a chance to get him on. It is the one, the only Mr. Dr. Dean. How are we doing, my man?
I'm doing very well, Von. Albeit the little bit of sleep I got last night, I'm still surviving.
Yeah, I feel we should maybe put a little disclaimer out on this one. That Dean was it 3 hours of sleep you got? You were up for 3 hours?
We were up for 3 hours and then I managed to get back asleep for a little while.
So if you has a little nod off on the podcast, guys, don't worry about it too much.
My brain's not as sharp as normal. I'm sitting here caffeinating up my brain to deal with the podcast.
I think that anyone who has been listening to the podcast a while will remember the episode that you did, and it's still one of the most highly listened to episodes of all the ones I've done. It's one of my favourites. It kind of goes over anyone who's listening. I love speaking to Dean because I get so much knowledge bombs, but it makes me think about, oh shit, yeah, I've forgotten about that. And I think it's just so important as a coach, athlete, whatever you want to call it, to just constantly re-go over education that once perhaps has been lost. But for someone listening who goes, who's this Dr. Dean guy? You know, he's Irish, he's got a wicked accent, but I don't know who he is. So could you give them a little bit of reintroduction of yourself, your career within bodybuilding, to where you're at right now?
So for people who don't know me, my name's Dr. Dean St. Mart. I have a PhD in synthetic organic chemistry, and my background prior to that was in chemistry and pharmaceutical chemistry, more so around pharmacology. I am a competitive bodybuilder, as you said. I've been competing since I was 22, so almost 10 years now. And I've represented Ireland on the international stage. And I guess the other side that people might know me is I was formerly an educator for Train by JP, and I'm also the formulator for Supplement Needs.
Fantastic. Now, that's a very brief introduction, but I think that you're always quite a humble man in regards to the accolades that you've attained within the bodybuilding scene. So, could you give them a little bit of summary of that, but also just where you're planning on going? Because I know that you had plans on competing this year. So, a little bit of background, if you could, on within bodybuilding, but also where you're going to go from, whether it's this year, next year, the year after.
So, to date, I've always managed to be top 6 in the Irish Nationals, whether it was IFBB or NABA. The highest I've placed so far was I won a regional show and I placed 3rd at my first ever Nationals. But since then, I've always been 4th, 5th, 6th in the Nationals. So my plan was, after taking, it's almost 3 years now since I competed with the birth of my son, was to come back this year, obviously having teamed up with Callum and the improvements that we've made to my physique, and finally try and tick off that box that I started when I first competed, which was to win a national title. I think it's interesting because I often wonder if I had have won a national title at some point, would I be just happy to just continue training? I think there's some sort of inherent drive there, that there's a goal not accomplished to win, say, Mr. Ireland.
Yeah, I like that, mate. And it was good to watch your journey up until COVID happened, but to see you still continue to make progress ruthlessly in your garage is fantastic, and it's inspiring. I think that a lot of bodybuilders out there could probably relate to that sort of sense of wanting to tick off a box, or a redemption sort of year. And I've got no doubts with your application of the basics, but also with Cal, you guys will fucking nail that, and it'll be awesome to just kick back and watch it all happen and unfold. But I'm going to delve straight into the sort of topic of today's podcast, which was all about sort of rebounding from a show. We're going to talk a little bit about fluid balance and whatnot across the year, because I feel it's an area that, I suppose, in the natural game, or in any game, people say we have this window of opportunity to add tissue. In parts that's true, but in parts that's maybe not true. So for someone that's kind of listening, that's new to this, could you explain what do people mean when they see, you know, I'm rebounding, bro? And just give them a layman sort of explanation of it would be fantastic before we go into detail.
So if we sort of break it into two routes between, say, a natural athlete and an enhanced athlete, the sort of principle of the rebound is the same, in that I guess the bro mythology is that you have this now period post-show, once you finish competing, that you can magically add tons of muscle tissue to your frame, and that you can magically negate the laws of thermodynamics and eat as many calories as you want for 10 days post-show without gaining any fat, which unfortunately is not the case. And in most cases, when you see a natural athlete, and more so if they've only competed once or twice, you'll often see feedback if you're coaching someone like that, oh, look at how much fluid I'm holding. And it actually takes being very, subjective and saying, actually, no, that is not fluid that you're holding. You've actually gained quite a lot of fat. We tend to see, you have a hyperpalatable response post-show where you're binging on quite a lot of high-fat foods that, to be honest, if someone was to binge post-show, they'd probably be better off binging on carbohydrates, because of, again, there's less likelihood, I'm not going to say, based on hormone balance and obviously energy balance, but it takes quite a high amount of carbohydrates for you to then spill over and start processing into triglycerides versus direct fat storage from fats themselves. So post-show, you see people indulging in all these sort of foods, pizza, ice cream, everything that they've been restricted, cakes, really high fatty foods. Whereas, if they had gone out and binged on rice, high amounts of rice, high amounts of like plain carbohydrate, you'd see some water retention, which we'll get into. But in terms of fat gain, once the water dissipates, it's very rare that you see a high amount of fat gain. So in reality, post-show, you need to be sort of as diligent in the rebound management of energy balance versus when you were prepping. But it also brings with it then the psychological factor that you don't want to fall into the trap that previously was rebounding slowly, or, reverse dieting.
Yeah.
Where you slowly bumped like 10 grams of carbohydrate per week over a period of 6 weeks.
I can do that.
It's just too slow.
Yeah.
You've been in this sort of deficit region for 12 to 16 weeks. Ideally, what you want to do is accept that you can't maintain that body fat condition that you had pre-contest, but also need to understand that you've now transitioned from a pre-contest to, an improvement phase or a cruise phase to manage health post-show after, say, with an enhanced athlete. And it's probably more so beneficial that you bring that person's calories straight back to maintenance, or say 5 to 10% above maintenance. What you're sort of doing there is removing that psychological barrier, that sort of food focus of feeling restricted post-contest, where, say, their carbohydrates may have been 170 pre-contest. By bringing their calories back to maintenance, or even 5 to 10% beyond, your carbohydrates all of a sudden fall in the 4 to 450 range, say. And that's a lot of foods.
Yeah.
Someone psychologically than what you were on pre-contest. So you sort of remove that restriction that, okay, I'm only eating, 80 grams of oats pre-workout and that's my carbs for the day, or I'm having some carbs post-workout, spacing out, say, 5 meals of maybe, 80 grams of carbs, which is a lot of food. And it removes that sort of food focus that I feel restricted. I need to have, chocolate or pizza or whatever else. And again, it fuels performance then, because obviously you want to ensure safely that you're moving into this improvement phase now, where the focus is on regaining back strength that was lost during the pre-contest phase. And then obviously that strength increase will potentially then lead to hypertrophy and obviously muscle gain, provided we're fueling the athlete correctly.
I remember listening to a podcast. I think you did this with Callum. I think it was last year. I was walking the gym listening to it, and you were speaking about, obviously, when we put this food in, like post show or post photo shoot, whatever it is, we feel amazing, and we go back to training. And what's the one thing that we want to do when we train is we feel so much better, so we just go all in.
Yep.
So what I would say is that, do you think that that has the like now the best advice would be to not to do that and to maybe just give the body some time to accumulate fat, but I would say 80% of bodybuilders probably just go fucking all in. Now, that extra sort of food that they put in, they see PBs, and they think, oh, all this weight I've gained is because I'm putting on muscle mass. Could you maybe perhaps tell them the flaw in that, and what in fact it actually, what that total weight that they've gained? Let's say, for example, it's quite easy we can see someone be 6, 7, 8 kilos up within a couple of weeks, whether it's assisted or non-assisted. But if we had those two scenarios, would there be any muscle gain, little muscle gain, or none at all?
I'd be willing to put it down to a small amount of muscle gain. Most people fail to recognize also that the fluid surrounding your connective tissues is going to be quite limited during a pre-contest phase. So obviously, when we start eating an excessive amount of calories post-show, during this rebound phase, we're replenishing some of that connective tissue fluid, which again helps to lubricate our joints, which makes our body feel so much better post-show. But, you know, just because the joint itself may be lubricated and be able to handle slightly more force, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's the underlying tendon strength there to support that sudden increase in strength. And, you know, that can potentially lead to a tendon rupture or an injury quite easily, as it would during a pre-contest phase. Really, what you're sort of looking at is not putting sort of a number on a rebound phase, more so making sure that health stays in check, so we keep blood pressure under control by managing fluid balance, which again we'll touch now in a minute on, because that is quite important when it comes to, say, an enhanced athlete who has used diuretics. There's huge potential there for heart implications, whether it's through blood pressure or mineral imbalance. And then for, I guess, a natural athlete, you're going to, again, potentially have small increases in blood pressure, but it's not going to be as drastic as if they had taken, say, a diuretic, which is going to force a hormone imbalance surrounding your fluids.
So if we were to go into, you know, just the mechanisms which perhaps maintain fluid, I suppose before we go into, you know, why we see such massive increases in weight after shows and whatnot. I mean, I personally gained, you know, something like 40 pounds in, like, I think it was 6 weeks or whatever, but no swollen ankles. If Carl's listening, no swollen ankles. He doesn't have coaches, so it's fine. But from a health perspective, you know, could you explain how, well, number one, how we maintain fluid balance, but just number two, how we sort of stay on top of that all year round would be awesome.
So when we look at a pre-contest setting, we have really two hormones that we're trying to keep in control when it comes to, I guess, fluid balance, or what we manipulate in order to achieve lower levels of water subcutaneously and maintaining fluid balance intracellularly. So in other words, get rid of the water from under the skin while maintaining muscle cell volume from hydration. And that's controlled by, you have two hormones. So people have heard of these: aldosterone, which is released by your adrenal glands. And what aldosterone does is it increases sodium absorption in your body, and it increases potassium excretion. So what you're sort of doing there is you're trying to maintain blood volume by, I guess, decreasing the amount of sodium that's absorbed. So this is when we're trying to, again, excrete fluid from the subcutaneous layer. We're trying to ensure that sodium is not maintained or retained. And then we want to make sure that we retain potassium inside our muscle tissue in order to ensure that there's hydration there, because they operate with a sodium potassium pump.
Yeah.
So sodium pushes water out, potassium drives it in. That's sort of the basics behind it. So when we look at sort of how we peak someone, we'll sort of load them with sodium for the week. So what you're sort of doing there is keeping aldosterone in check. So you'll always keep, the old school method was pull sodium out as early as possible.
Yeah.
But you're just upsetting aldosterone very early by doing that. So normally what you want to do is keep sodium as high as possible throughout peak week until, say, 36 hours before stage time. At that point, you'd say half your sodium intake. Sure. So whereas before you might have been quite liberal putting salt in your meals, say for example, it's like say 6 turns of a grinder or 6 shakes, you might cut it down to 3 shakes.
Yeah.
And you follow that throughout, say, the Friday with a show on Saturday.
Yep.
Sometime then Friday evening before bed, you just stop sodium. So at that point, you've maintained sodium being high, aldosterone stays in control, and what you're sort of doing there is ensuring that there's high levels of sodium to keep things in balance.
Yep.
The other thing that works opposite to aldosterone then is antidiuretic hormone, ADH, and that's released by the hypothalamus in your brain, which then tells your pituitary to make ADH. And ADH, what it does is antidiuretic. It decreases the amount of water that's excreted from your body.
Cool.
So what we sort of want to do now is you want to tip the favor balance towards now stopping ADH's release in our body.
Yeah.
So by stopping ADH's release, we're now going to increase the amount of urine that's made, and it's going to lead to a dehydrated state.
Sure.
And obviously how we get, I guess, ADH under control is by increasing the amount of water that we consume, so that it gives the brain a signal that we're not in a dehydrated state.
Yep.
When we're in a dehydrated state, ADH is, I guess, released so that you retain fluid.
Makes sense.
So that's why we see the typical run sodium high during the week, and then at some point on Friday, you keep running water high all week at a normal level, or it may be a small little increase, and then you at some point abruptly pull water, say 24 hours from stage time or 12 hours from stage time. And what you're sort of doing now is you've pushed the balance so that your body's continuously flushing out fluid, so no ADH is released. And you're also, I guess, because you've kept sodium high, there's no aldosterone feedback. So again, you're flushing out sodium with your urine, basically. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of how you approach it with a natural athlete. You can add in then natural diuretics like caffeine, anything that's going to induce diuresis, which is just the loss of fluid. But I guess this is where being an educated coach comes into it, because then the morning after you do this on show day, your athlete is going to be quite dehydrated if you do this correctly, but you may have lost some intracellular volume because of the potassium and sodium loss.
Yep.
So this is where people fall into, I guess, the trap of being either flat from a glycogen perspective, but more so people are generally flat from a dehydration perspective. There's not enough sodium present within the blood to maintain blood volume, and there's not enough potassium within the muscle tissue itself to maintain hydration. So you end up with this sort of flat looking physique where people start blaming, I didn't eat enough carbohydrates.
Yeah.
Whereas if they had of that morning of the show actually consumed a small bit of fluid with a small bit of potassium and sodium, their physique probably would have looked so much different to than if they had piled more carbohydrates in that morning. It's often an oversight that people fail to look at, I guess, how much fluid comes out during the night, and then obviously how much fluid you need to push back in order to maintain that sort of fullness.
That, I think everything you said there, that broke everything down from, okay, this is what that is, this is what it does, this is what it is, and I love how logical and educated it all was. So for anyone listening that maybe doesn't know what ADH is, aldosterone is, I would sure bet from that explanation they know it now, which is awesome. So let's say we've got that athlete, that competitor to the stage, they've competed, um, after which we tend to know, massive, could be potentially massive binging on hyperpalatable foods, cakes, crisps, etc., etc., and then could perhaps we tend to see a big increase in weight. Now, if we talked about exactly what you just said, and we've maybe perhaps manipulated sodium potassium, is there any sort of dangers that come with that, or perhaps because I think what a lot of bodybuilders do, they just switch off. They've competed, they're so high, they're like, fucking yes, I'm going to go out and get kebabs and pizza and stuff. And I guess they don't think about that unless their coach does. But could you maybe shed a little bit of light to what are some of the potential dangers that kind of go there?
So I guess depending on what you've sort of done with your electrolyte imbalance, um, there are potentials for arrhythmias in the heart. We've seen that with more so like professional bodybuilders that would push the boundaries of completely depleting minerals from the body, and then obviously making a bad judgment on when they're, I guess, reloading to restore glycogen. In natural athletes, it's quite rare that you're going to see something like this because of it's very difficult, I guess, to force your body in one direction unless they completely don't drink for like 3 or 4 days.
Right.
With enhanced athletes, there's a big danger, and unfortunately, over the last few years, I've seen amateur athletes who have had heart attacks after competing.
Jeez.
And that's more so driven by diuretic use. So that is the big danger when it comes to diuretics, and not actually understanding how diuretics work. Generally, a diuretic should be viewed as sort of, I guess, an insurance policy that you are excreting fluid throughout the night. It's not that you start popping diuretics from 3 days out to make sure that you're flushing fluid, because your kidneys will naturally excrete fluid based on the discussion on aldosterone and ADH. Once you keep those in control, your body will be excreting fluid.
Yeah.
The whole purpose of a diuretic, say the night before, even the morning of the show, is just to edge the kidneys to keep, I guess, flushing fluid out of the body, to ensure that if there is any fluid remaining subcutaneously, that it is being removed by the kidneys. And I guess that's sort of like years ago they would have used loop diuretics like Lasix.
Okay.
We rarely see that practice now with like the approach of science throughout bodybuilding, and obviously I guess people like myself talking on the stupidity of using something like it. A loop diuretic, basically how it works is it completely inhibits sodium, potassium and chloride reabsorption in your kidneys. So you basically just flush all those minerals out along with fluid.
Right.
Now, if you can imagine you taking Lasix for 2 days before a show, and even more so, professional practices used to use IV Lasix the night before a show.
Jesus.
When it comes to the morning of the show, you've sort of got a blank slate. So if you mess up and you start to load and say something that's potassium rich like potatoes, you're heading for a serious case of arrhythmia based on the electric potential of your cardiac tissue.
Wow.
Not to mention, it could go the other way and you could have severe cramps from complete depletion of those minerals. So we tend to not use Lasix, and if you have a coach and he says to you to use Lasix, just completely drop your coach. What sort of has come to light in the last while is sort of like not safe for diuretics, but what would be known as the potassium sparing diuretics, or combination diuretics, where you have a thiazide diuretic mixed with a potassium sparing one. So in that case, most people probably heard of Diazide, which is a thiazide mixed with triamterene, which is a potassium sparing diuretic. And what you sort of have there is you have your thiazide, which is inhibiting sodium and chloride transport in your kidneys so that they're excreted. But the triamterene is obviously saving some potassium from being excreted while forcing sodium out of the body. So it's sort of like an aldosterone antagonist.
Okay.
So it's going against the actions of aldosterone, which would be to retain sodium. By, I guess, preventing potassium from being excreted, there's less likelihood that you're going to end up with a dehydrated physique internally in terms of your muscle tissue losing intracellular hydration. When it comes to them post-contest, because you've upset this balance from homeostasis chemically, you then need to, I guess, pay your dues and understand that your body's always going to want to go back to homeostasis.
Yeah.
So eventually you sort of have, I guess, 24 hours grace. If you play everything right, you have about 24 hours where your physique will be dry before it starts to rebound. At that point, no matter what you do, your body's going to release aldosterone, so you're going to retain sodium. And you're going to have an increase in ADH, where your body's just going to pool water because of it's a survival mechanism.
Yep.
Throw in on top of that excessive carbohydrate binging, where you have approximately 4 grams of water per gram of carbohydrate.
Wow.
So you could have, again, mineral deficiencies. So in order for glycogen to be loaded, you need magnesium and vitamin B6. But people fail to realize, so the week pre-contest, if you carb someone up correctly in terms of their glycogen storage, unless they have a very anxious persona or they burn a lot of nervous energy, it's highly unlikely that you're going to deplete a lot of glycogen that you store if you do an early carb up during peak week. And even more so if you do a later carb up, if you start binging post-show, again, you don't have any sort of facility mechanism in order to uptake that glucose as glycogen.
Yeah.
So you end up in this scenario where you've come off stage, you're severely dehydrated, and immediately your food focuses on binge eating, as opposed to understanding, okay, I've upset this homeostatic balance of fluid. I'd actually be more intelligent now to actually start hydrating my body, restoring electrolyte balance, and, you know, being mindful of this, having, say, one, I wouldn't say cheat meal, but one luxurious meal, and wait for this homeostatic balance to ride over. So I'm speaking from experience here, and if people want to look at the data on my Instagram profile from when I done the nationals in 2016, and then I had the WFF NABA World Championships, I think it was 3 weeks later. So obviously I dehydrated myself. We used half a diuretic before bedtime. When I come off stage, because I knew I had that show in 3 weeks' time, I didn't have sort of food focus on going out and binging or whatever.
Sure.
My immediate focus after I got off stage was hydrate, to the point where I think I had about 4 liters of fluid from, I think I come off stage at 3 p.m. to when I went to bed at 11.
Damn.
Now, my diet at the time was very low in carbohydrates. So the meals sort of when I come off stage were, you know, chicken and vegetables, you know, salt, ketchup, condiments added to it. So that was Sunday. By Monday, 8 o'clock, I was up 15 pounds.
Wow.
By Tuesday afternoon, I was up, I think, 19.
Shit.
And then Tuesday evening, it was like someone turned on a tap.
All right.
And all throughout Tuesday night, just constantly going to the bathroom. Wednesday woke up pre-Saturday weight.
Oh wow.
So, and that was again no carbohydrates, no no excessive, like, so you can't fool your body out of this mechanism, this
I could,
homeostatic mechanism.
I can only imagine how much more that would have been if the example was you went out and had some as you call them, luxurious meals. So you could easily have seen another sort of 15, 20 pounds of fluid there.
Yeah, and I mean, like, so and that was me putting a big focus on hydration post-show, where as soon as I come off stage, I had a liter of water with some electrolytes, and kept drinking, every hour or so, to the point, like, on the Monday, I had planned on having a meal with Morgan, my wife,
right.
And I couldn't go out Monday night because my stomach was just so swollen with fluid.
Okay.
And you can sort of feel the fluid that you're drinking just sloshing around in your stomach.
Yeah.
And it was literally just being patient until, like I said, Tuesday evening. That was sort of when, you reach this homeostatic balance of aldosterone and ADH, and your body goes, oh, hang on, we don't need to actually hold on to all this fluid, and it starts excreting it out.
Yeah.
And that's sort of, again, it's sort of a double-edged sword, because someone gets into that scenario post-show. What's the first thing that they do?
Post-show?
Yeah, so if you run into that scenario where you've now, like me, woken up on Monday and I'm up 15 pounds of fluid.
Oh, they probably would want to do cardio and this time.
I'll tell you an even more stupid decision. They take another diuretic, thinking that they're going to flush the fluid out of their body with the diuretic.
Oh no!
And now you prolong this homeostatic balance, because now you've chucked in a diuretic that's again going against this hormone balance.
Yeah.
And you'll see competitors thinking, oh, they wake up Monday after a Sunday show and they're completely swollen with fluid. I'm just going to take half a diazide and it's going to flush the fluid out. And it's actually, no, you just need to be sensible and actually understand that your body's doing something that it's designed to do.
Yeah.
That, you just have to be patient and let it clear off.
Yeah, that's nuts. I mean, I guess what that would do for yourself, you knew the process, so it was easy to understand, right, this will happen, and I've got another show in 3 weeks, I'll be fine. But if there was someone that was sort of like blind leading the blind and just took everything their coach said and wasn't educated on, and they went and done that, you can only imagine how compounding on top of that stress and then X, Y, and Z, that would just be a recipe for disaster. Am I right?
Yeah, and I mean, even psychologically, and I'm not taking any digs, but an old practice was given, like, bikini athletes loop diuretics.
Damn.
And if you can imagine, then, okay, we have this, I guess, tedious psychological balance with a female post-show, and now all of a sudden their body's retaining, say, 10 to 12 pounds of fluid because of the diuretic. Yeah. And then panicking the next day and then going, what's going on here? And then obviously just chucking everything out the window and just continuing to binge.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you have a coach that understands fluid balance, can actually, I guess, educate the client before the show and go, right, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You're going to enjoy, your food the night of the show. We're going to put an emphasis on fluid intake when you come off stage. The next day, you're going to, obviously, we're going to pull carbohydrates right down, keep fluid and mineral intake high. You're going to get a little uncomfortable as your body tries to balance out, but obviously trust the plan, and by Wednesday you'll be back to pre-contest stage condition as well as stage fluid balance.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I think that when we talk about sort of minerals and sodium, potassium, I'll admit, as a younger bodybuilder, I didn't have a fucking clue their importance. And I'd see guys using low salt and doing this, that, and next thing, and I'd be like, what's the fucking point in that? I think what you've said up to now in the podcast reiterates the importance of them. But one thing I wanted to sort of touch on was, let's say someone's got through that period, they've got through that phase, and they're now well into an off-season. And we'll know that as potentially male-assisted bodybuilders, calories will get fairly high. And when they get high, what's the first thing that we do? We get very, very lazy with our veg intake, with our fruit intake, pretty much everything. And from what you've said, I could see how it would maybe be devastating for the likes of like potassium intake, because that's where it's usually going to come from. And with that, perhaps might come an elevation in blood pressure. Now, am I on the right lines here?
Yeah, you definitely are, because so you're probably going to, in most cases, you're going to have higher sodium intake.
Sure.
Most definitely. But as an artifact of high sodium intake, you actually have high potassium excretion. So that's why the RDA for potassium is way higher than sodium, not only from the perspective that, you know, the sodium potassium pump operates on like 3 sodiums to 2 potassiums. You're, as an artifact of how aldosterone works, aldosterone saves sodium, but it doesn't save potassium when you just excrete it out.
Okay.
And that is important then for obviously maintaining fluid balance. I guess blood volume would be the more important way of speaking about it, which would affect your blood pressure.
I think that, you know, again, from my younger days, I didn't track my blood pressure. I was just mindlessly, you know, fall blind leading the blind type thing. But I think as the years have went on, with people like yourself, educators out there, just really the importance of why we should be doing it. It's so valuable, and I wish that back in the day, when I say back in the day, I mean like 2016, 2015, that there was educators like yourself that spoke about it so openly and so frequently, because I would do so many things different than I do now. And a lot of clients that I'll work with, like assisted guys, I'll say, right, how much salt are you putting on your meals, or how much, you know, you look at their diet and it's devoid of any sort of green veg or fruit, and you kind of go, what the fuck are you doing? But
Yeah.
I guess I didn't see the importance of how it would help maintain blood pressure. And actually, I use an example. I think I did say this on our last podcast. I tagged you, and it was a client of mine last year. They used one of your the products you formulated, and their blood pressure dropped by like 10, or the systolic had dropped by like from 130 into the low 120s, which was huge. Now, for anyone out there that doesn't see the importance of green veg or potassium intake, do you want to perhaps reiterate some of the points you've made on why they should, but also why perhaps staying on top of that intake will help the likes of muscle contraction, pumps in the gym, ultimately hypertrophy?
Yeah, so I mean, on a simple level, if your potassium intake is balanced, you're going to have more intracellular fluid within your muscle tissue. Again, the muscle's more hydrated. There's greater, I guess, electrical potential there for contractions, for stronger contractions. And obviously, not that contractions are the be-all and end-all of hypertrophy, but it does lend itself then to obviously the muscle-mind connection and feel for actually working that muscle directly. On a higher level, your kidneys are so important in this regard, because obviously we've been talking about water balance, but it's all driven by your kidneys. Your kidneys are what does the filtration, what pulls the fluid, what reabsorbs the potassium, sodium, chlorine. And unfortunately, high blood pressure can lead to kidney damage, because obviously how we view the kidneys in my aspect is that you have a very delicate net. Yeah. And if you can imagine, when you have high blood pressure, it's like getting a power hose to that delicate net.
Yeah.
Or even so, now that I sort of think about it, it's like a spider's web.
Yeah.
You know, rain passes through a spider's web, no problem. You know, the rate of rainfall. But if you actually got like a hose, you just blast through the spider web. And if you can imagine, once that sort of damage is done to the glomeruli, which is the part of our kidneys that does this filtration process, once the damage is done there, it's very difficult for it to repair. And I guess that's sort of where you start to see potential formation of chronic kidney disease in bodybuilders. And it's all driven by a higher level of blood pressure.
Now, is this something that is perhaps well, when I was going to say something that's changed over the years, but I'm referring to how long I've been properly bodybuilding for, which in reality, in the longevity scheme of things, isn't that long. But back, if we were to think, say, back to 10 years ago, was there such an emphasis on this, or was it just take this, that, and the next thing, and then if you feel all right, then you're all good? And if that was the case, it has changed drastically now. But what was it like, say, 10 years ago?
I'm not really sure what happened 10 years ago, to be honest. I guess we'd have to listen to, I guess, anecdotal reports of guys from the 90s like Dorian and Ronnie, who obviously seem to have had medical guidance throughout their careers, but that's a professional athlete.
Yeah.
In terms of the amateur scene, I'd be willing to take a guess that up until, say, the popularity of bodybuilding forms within the late 2000s, I'd say up until that point it was more so, I guess, anecdotal knowledge passed within gyms, or passed within, I guess, a bodybuilding community verbally, as opposed to having open access information as we have now. Yeah, it's very difficult, but I'd be willing to take a guess that if you were to quiz, I guess, bodybuilders who are probably in their 50s at this point, who would have competed 20 years ago, probably did have very little education in terms of health management, because it probably wasn't mainstream media. You didn't have the likes of Muscular Development as a magazine, although I guess publications like that are going out of business themselves. But you would have had the likes of Flex or Muscle and Fitness, that was all about the aesthetic side and the training side, but no one really was speaking about, well, these guys are enhanced athletes and this is what they're sort of doing to protect their health.
Yeah, and I guess that's maybe where it's changed, is that like bodybuilders have become a lot more open about saying, well, I use this, I use that, and it's maybe perhaps then allowed educators to say, well, actually, this is what you should sort of be taking care of. Now, that almost brings me to the second last question, which was, if we've talked about fluid balance, we've talked about gaining weight, and we've talked about sort of, if we were to look at the sort of peak of an off seasons, at the point where someone's calories are at their absolute highest, we spoke about maintaining sort of fluid balance. Is there anything else that we should perhaps be aware of? Anything that you maybe see guys like or girls do that, or perhaps something that they're missing? And if so, what would you sort of recommend that they stay on top of?
When it comes to fluid balance, if it's an enhanced athlete, they need to understand that anabolic steroids, don't just necessarily act on androgen receptors. So that's it's a general misconception that, take anabolic steroids, they just act on androgen receptors. The androgen receptors themselves are a member of the steroid hormone receptors. So within that, you're going to have, I guess, the mineral corticoids are going to be one of them. And as we see, aldosterone is a mineral corticoid. So you have potential there for an anabolic steroid to act on a mineral corticoid receptor itself, and I guess influence how fluid is balanced by, I guess, retaining sodium in the body.
Yeah.
How would you control that? It's basically down to sort of, how much, I guess, the dosage of the androgens that you're taking. And how do you control that? It's just by reducing the dose, obviously. Or keep it on top of other ways to maintain fluid balance. Obviously, keeping water intake high, keeping, I guess, your mineral balance correct with potassium, because obviously, if you're going to be retaining sodium, you want to ensure that your potassium intake is kept up. Estrogen balance. So estradiol itself is going to affect mineral corticoid and obviously fluid balance within the body. So again, making sure that we keep an eye on estradiol, monitoring blood pressure. I guess it always comes back to, like, the key fundamental here with bodybuilders in the height of off season surrounding fluid balance is either you have big puffy ankles with a big sock indent that's sort of telling you fluid is pooling at your legs during the day based on gravity, or you start to see symptoms of high estrogen, bloated face, excessive fat gain, or like even the simplest thing of it, like we spoke about, blood pressure. Just keep an eye on your blood pressure 2 to 3 times a week, and obviously ensuring that you're keeping it within normal range. Don't let it go any higher than 130/90, basically. And I think at that point, after that, ensuring that you have adequate intake of magnesium and vitamin B6, like I said, to ensure that you are storing glycogen efficiently. And that's sort of really it from off the top of my head.
It's funny that you should mention about the swollen ankles and the indent of the sock, because it was only 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think 3 weeks ago now, I reached my peak in my body weight. I think it got up to 128, and just all of a sudden I sit at my desk for about 6-8 hours a day. I looked down when I took my socks off, and I was like, holy fucking shit. Right, just massively swollen. But what had I done? Gotten lazy with green veg, stopped putting low salt on my meat meals, and just like literally maybe I'd done that for maybe 2 weeks. I think I was lazy for it and saw that, and when I saw that, I was like, this is fucking shit. And of course I was lazy because I wasn't checking my blood pressure. The minute I checked it, I'm like, we need to sort this, because I think it was like 134, 135. I was like, nah. And then within like literally 7 to 10 days of reintroducing potassium again through green veg, low salt meat, although I think it was just because my appetite I hate food, right? That's what I tend to say. I was hating food at the time. The last thing you want to do is, if you've got a big bowl of chicken and potatoes, is add spinach or your green beans or what. But I instantly saw like an improvement within 7 days, and I can now sure as hell say no swollen ankles. But it just reminded me of the podcast you done with Callum last year, where albeit I don't think my ankles were anywhere near as bad because he was in a post show, but it reminded me of that, and I just thought, what am I doing? Because I'll preach to clients to stay on top of this, that, and the next thing. But I just want to give that example because I'm a coach, and I just want to say even we can get lazy with it sometimes. But knowing from the likes of yourself, sharing the valuable golden nuggets that you've given to the episode, I hope that the listeners can sort of, I'm not going to say sort an issue out like that by themselves, because I think that if you don't know, you should definitely contact yourself.
Yeah. Like the other thing that people fail to see there as well is nocturia, which is frequent urination throughout the night.
Yep.
That's going to be driven by an electrolyte imbalance. So if someone's saying that, I'm pissing every 2 hours during the night, if you think about it, fluid's going to naturally pool at your ankles throughout the day when you're walking, as opposed to, as an artifact of gravity, the fluid going down to your legs, coming back to your heart, it is going to be under greater pressure to come back to the heart. When you lie down at night, your blood pressure drops, and that fluid can now start to get pushed by obviously the lymph back to the heart, back for processing at the kidneys. If you don't have adequate mineral balance, that fluid that's sort of pooled during the day isn't going to be retained by your body, and it's going to head straight for your kidneys to get filtered and processed into urine. You'd be fairly sure that a lot of people could rectify frequent urination throughout the night by actually paying attention to fluid balance.
I never thought of that before, ever. I used to always still say I've had a weak bladder my whole life, but whenever I get through a night where I haven't gone to the toilet, I'm like, holy fucking shit. I always wake up bursting for a piss, mind you, but that's definitely something that not even I thought of. So it puts even more emphasis on the fact that staying on top of your electrolyte balance, which, again, openly and admittedly, something a few years ago I didn't really pay much attention to at all, because I was just so... I think there'll be many guys out there that are in that point where you're just like, yeah, I'm fucking taking gear, I'm going to get huge, yeah. Whereas now there's such a huge emphasis on health that yourself are putting on. And now, before, I know you're a busy man, before you go, what I wanted to always ask listeners, the last question was when will we see you on stage again? I think that you answered that at the very sort of start of the podcast. It's supposed to be this year, but now you're going to be even better next year through the Garage Gains.
Hopefully, fingers crossed. I hope that we make it to the stage next year. We're planning potentially our second trial at the moment, so that was sort of my drive to get on stage this year, was that if we had a second child, then that would be sort of finish this year hopefully on a high with the goal ticked, and then sort of be able to go, right, I can sort of walk away from competitive bodybuilding for a while, but let's see what happens next year.
Yeah, awesome. Now, for anyone listening out there that they want to see Garage Gains, they want to see you lifting in there, or they want to find out a bit more about you, do you want to just drop your Instagram handle and where they can contact you, perhaps for coaching or anything, information at all?
Yeah, my Instagram is Dean STM, DEANSTM, and my email is on my profile. So if you want to contact me for a consult or obviously help with coaching, it's there. Feel free to contact me. I have a YouTube page which is the same handle, but I haven't really updated anything to it. But that's sort of where you'll find the nugget that people most know me about for PCT.
Yeah.
And then other than that, supplementneeds.co.uk is the company that I formulate all the CV stack, Ashtrag Flow, which is kidney and blood pressure, or the infamous sleep stack. Most people probably know me through that sort of way. So supplementneeds.co.uk, and my discount code is Dr. Dean, so that'll save you 5% off your whole order.
And we've got to make sure that you use that one and not the Muscle Mentors one, right?
Yeah.
I saw that on a post one time. I think that you can have a post. You're like, nah, use this, now use that. But no, dude, listen, a massive thank you for myself. As always, I'm so grateful for you taking the time to share your information, not only freely with the world all over your platforms, but on this podcast as well. And I think that it'll be a huge value to the listeners out there. So massive thanks from me, my man. I hope that today, wherever you are listening, please give Dean a follow and make sure that you're watching him, giving it the beans in the garage. I just hit end record there. I thought that was a pretty good